Good evening from Colchester, the original capital of Roman Britain, a city established by some of the first people to come here in small boats across the Channel. The perfect location then to debate immigration. We're at the First Sight Arts Centre in the shadow of Colchester Castle, used for centuries as a jail. It was famously grim, damp, run down and overcrowded. Sound familiar? On this special extended programme, we'll also discuss law and order. We'll hear from an audience drawn from across the political spectrum and from the 7 main parties. Both of you aren't believed by voters. Nick Thomas-Symonds, is that a problem for you, or is it rather good because nobody believes you're going to solve the problem anyway?
Of course you want to build trust, but it's no surprise that people don't have trust, having had 4 Conservative governments elected on manifestos that have all broken their promises. So those figures don't come as a surprise. Net migration is too high at 685,000, and what we need is a plan to bring it down. So firstly, what we need to do is, where there are particular sectors, we need a proper plan so that we can upskill our own workforce. Take engineering, for example. Engineering visas for people coming from overseas have doubled, whilst engineering apprenticeships here in the UK have almost halved.
But what is your actual pledge? Because they've taken the measures that will bring the immigration figures down. If you get into government, you'll claim that that's because of you.
They haven't taken measures to bring immigration down. You look at recent years, it's been at a record high. And what they needed to do, what the next Labour government, should we be privileged enough to form one, will do, is have a skills strategy right across those different sectors, like health and social care, for example, the IT sector, and not just move to that lever of many people coming in from overseas.
What's the number of net migration that you think is right for this country?
Richard, a number is not a plan. What you actually
How do you plan for infrastructure?
Firstly,
how do you plan for houses? How do you plan for doctors?
Plan. And secondly, what we need to do as well is, where people, like we convinced the Conservatives to abandon their discount on employing workers from overseas at 20% less than here. What they also need to do is to be able to crack down on poor employment practices, where workers from overseas have been employed without proper rights and at a lower rate. That needs to be dealt with as well.
Genuine asylum seekers can be accepted, and those who are economic migrants can be rejected. But the truth is that the Conservative Party have allowed mass immigration in the last 2 years deliberately, in complete contrast to what they promised election after election after election. 1 person is arriving legally every minute. That means we need to build a new home just for those arriving every 2 minutes.
How many leave? How often do they leave?
Well, no, that's the net number.
Yeah. How many do they leave? How many leave?
The net number in 2023 was almost 700,000 people, just below the net number in 2022. So those numbers I've just given you, that is the net increase. We're not building enough homes for our own people, let alone the homes for people.
No, we're not. This rhetoric around resources completely misses the point, and it fans the flames of the very rhetoric that you have mentioned. Lady on the front row, I didn't catch your name, I'm sorry. Under our migration system, under the Conservatives, we have the worst of both worlds. We have sectors like the NHS, social care, hospitality, engineering, so many different sectors that simply cannot get the people they need with skills, because there hasn't been an investment in this country in apprentices and skills programmes, and at the same time the government is also cutting off the supply from abroad as well. So it's hardly any surprise that our economy is flatlining. So what we need to do is get rid of these ridiculous arbitrary targets, get rid of arbitrary salary thresholds. We need to invest in a proper skills strategy in this country. Liberal Democrats are the only party saying that we will have a higher minimum wage for care workers. More than 105,000 people came to this country to work in our care sector last year. We should welcome them and thank them for propping up our care system and for looking after our loved ones. But we should not be doing that at the expense of investing in our own workforce. And it is possible to do both in a way where we can invest in our own domestic workforce, and then when we need to get different people in from abroad for different sectors, we can do that sector by sector depending on what we need. And that avoids that kind of resource-driven rhetoric that fans the flames.
If you meet a migrant in the NHS, they're more likely to be treating you than to be ahead of you in the queue. Now, some politicians, and unfortunately the list of which politicians that is getting longer, like to scapegoat migrants for the problems with underfunding public services, when in reality, the cause of that is decades of decisions to underfund those public services by political parties. They could choose to make other decisions. They could choose to make bold decisions about how you pay for public services and how you raise those funds. And the Green Party is the only party in England being honest about that.
Read out yours. Hang on, Richard.
The question is about how to combat hostility. How about these guys stop creating and stoking that hostility in the first place? We need to have an honest debate. Of course, we need to control borders. Every country controls its borders. But to blame migrants for housing, for problems in the NHS, to blame what for public spending cuts that have been
called pressure on public services
by the Conservatives.
If
but
you
what
don't
about the
plan
pressure
for
on
it,
public services caused by a failure to invest in public services? How about
you have to plan, don't you?
How about looking at what our actual needs are? What I'd like to do is look at how we have visa powers in Wales, for example, to make sure that we can bring in people into shortage occupations. Give visas to those that we need here.
What about training people in Wales? What about skilling up your own people?
We have a great success here, says the Conservative representative on the panel, by cutting the number of visas to people accompanying workers. There has been a 76% drop in visa applications for social care because you have taken that decision. Now, in social care, I don't know who you want to look after you when you're in your old age, but we'll need people to work.
Now, you came here from Afghanistan as a 12-year-old. What's your question?
Thank you. Good evening. My question is, Christian, how could we have a sensible and productive debate on these issues of migration? As a citizen now and as a taxpayer, I'd like to see a fair deal and a fair system and policies on the public behalf, but also a compassionate and humane approach towards refugees and asylum seekers. Unfortunately, as we heard, they've been scapegoated and dehumanized and criminalized for coming seeking protection. I feel like as a British citizen now, I'm going to be voting for the first time, which I'm really looking forward to. And everyone, I hope everyone votes and gets involved. But like, we should be proud of providing sanctuary to people like me.
Okay, so we talked about legal migration. Let's now talk about asylum seekers and refugees, like our questioner, Keith Brown.
Yeah, I was just mentioning my own experience in terms of asylum seekers, and I'm very proud that in Scotland we've done more than our fair share in terms of both Ukrainian asylum seekers and Syrian refugees as well. But I'm very interested in your own experience in Afghanistan, because I think what the UK did in Afghanistan was utterly appalling. The people they left behind that had acted as intelligence support and various other forms of support, and I say this as an ex-service person myself, was utterly atrocious, betraying those people that should have had safe flight back out of Afghanistan. Very dangerous thing to say, given the roles that they played. And I absolutely agree with your point that if we demonise them non-stop, that's why these problems come. And why are they wanting to demonise them? Because there's other stuff they should be doing, the big parties are not doing, so they go after scapegoats. And it's easy to go after refugees, and it's wrong.
Chris Philp, when you hear a man from Afghanistan asking for a little compassion in this debate, are you a little ashamed of where this has all got to?
No, frankly, I'm not. And firstly, congratulations for achieving citizenship and for voting in your first election here. Obviously, you're taking it seriously, and well done for reaching that milestone and participating in this fantastic democracy of ours. Look, there was a question earlier about safe and legal routes, and I think you were asking about this as well. Where there are crises, this country, the United Kingdom, is generous-hearted and open. So when there was the crisis in Syria, when Assad was murdering his own people, we set up the UK resettlement scheme. We directly and legally and safely resettled 25,000 people from Syria and from refugee camps on Syria's borders into the UK. That was the largest legal resettlement scheme in relation to Syria. I've mentioned Ukraine already. 200,000 Ukrainians have been welcomed here to the UK. A similar number of people from Hong Kong fleeing oppression by the communist regime in Afghanistan, of course, your own original country, through the ARAP and Iraq schemes. I think about 25,000 people, many of whom served with our armed forces, but others who served in sort of civil positions that may make them at risk from the Taliban, like judges, for example, have been welcomed here as well. So where there are crises,
in Pakistan, the same number of people are actually waiting to come.
That's right. And we're urging, the Home Office is urgently working to bring those people safely into the United Kingdom, and that work is happening as we speak. So where there is a real need, then this country rightly welcomes people. But it does have to be done in a safe and legal way. We're probably going to come on to small boats later, but that is not the way to organise asylum. We should do it safely and legally, like those examples I've just given.
The backlog issue is a complete mess entirely of the Conservatives' making. So because of the legislation that they've introduced, there are now 118,000 people who can't claim asylum in this country, neither can they be deported to Rwanda to have their claims processed there. So there's 118,000 people stuck in no man's land without any ability to do anything at all, and taxpayers are having to pay for that. So the first thing that we would do is scrap the Rwanda scheme, which has been incredibly expensive, unworkable, completely immoral, that has cost £291 million already, without a single person being sent to Rwanda who wasn't paid to go. And by scrapping that scheme, that money alone that's been spent already could have been used to pay for 6,000 Home Office caseworkers to process those claims, get the claims down. So what Liberal Democrats will do is scrap the Rwanda scheme, invest in Home Office processors, get the claims down to processors within 3 months for each person, and if anybody's claim can't be dealt with within 3 months, they then have the right to work, which means that taxpayers aren't subsidising them to work and pay tax.
Under the Liberal Democrat scheme, if the application is rejected, what will happen to that person? Will they be returned? Will they be deported?
This has always been the case, that if somebody makes an application to this country and their application is refused, then of course they get returned to their country of origin. That has always been the case. But the problem we have at the moment is we have this no man's land situation. As you described, the backlog of 118,000 people. Instead of paying for the Rwanda scheme, which hasn't worked, we could invest that money in getting those claims down.
I'll probably say this, going slightly off script. I can probably dismantle all of your immigration policies. Please do reach out. So I'm an immigration solicitor and I work for the Joint Council for the Welfare of Immigrants. My clients are in limbo and stuck in the system for years. They can't work, and some of you do say you'll give them the right to work, but really, you haven't before. And they are stuck in crap housing, bad hotels. Yeah. They are put in army barracks that are not fit for purpose, and they are also put onto barges. These are traumatized people, and we demonize them.
Absolutely.
How will this panel really bring back humanity into our system, give safety to the people who are seeking, safety in our country? And we do say we are leaders of human rights. Where are they?
The answer is incredibly simple.
Speed isn't one of them, I'll tell you right now.
Speed is absolutely one of them. That is the kind and compassionate thing to do, is to deal with people, is to deal with the applications promptly and appropriately.
The way to deal with this is to make sure that there are safe and legal routes set up where necessary. And I've mentioned some of the examples before, like the Afghan scheme and the Syrian scheme. What we can't have is people illegally entering the country by small boat from a safe place. France is a safe country. Nobody has to leave France to flee danger. The people coming across on small boats are overwhelmingly young, single men. We should be prioritising people who are in genuine need. The people that came from Syria, for example, very often they were women and children and people who needed support. So we cannot have this small boat traffic continuing. And that is why the Rwanda scheme is so important. It acts as a deterrent.
It's clearly not a deterrent, Chris. 800 people have come today, Chris. Today,
Richard,
800. It's not a deterrent.
Richard, in case you haven't noticed, the Rwanda scheme has actually not started yet, and indeed it won't start.
So how do you know it's a
deterrent?
deterrent?
You're right, it won't start, because you're right, it won't start, because you're not going to be in government.
Unless the Conservatives win the general election.
How do you know it's a deterrent?
Well, it's a very good question. So there's a couple of...
The Home Office says...
Well, I'll give you the answer. I'll give you the answer. So the Australians tried something similar about 10 years ago. They called it Operation Sovereign Borders. They completely stopped what they called their illegal maritime arrivals.
That's because they had a pickup, they had a pushback policy.
Using removals to, in that case, Nauru. But secondly, we set up a returns agreement with Albania about a year and a half ago, and that saw a 94% reduction in Albanians crossing the English Channel because they knew if they came across, they'd be returned. So there are two very clear case studies showing you how a return scheme or removal scheme acts as a deterrent.
I wanted to ask the panel if they agree that the climate crisis will be the main driver of immigration in the future.
Reenap Yorath.
Absolutely. I mean, we're already seeing the impacts of climate change. It was disturbing, if I may say, hearing a spokesman on behalf of the Reform Party speaking on television in Wales last night with all the classic climate change denying tropes being
No one's denying climate change.
Well, your spokesman was.
No, it's how you adapt to it.
Your spokesman was.
It's about how you adapt to climate change. And the point is that net zero...
No, he was denying climate change.
It's the
he was
wrong
saying
answer.
that he was saying that scientists don't believe in climate change.
Well,
scientists disagree.
But this is going to be at the heart of the movement of people and political decisions.
Which is why you've got to create economic growth in developing nations. That's the key thing. It's all about...
creating economic growth in itself doesn't tackle climate change.
Creating economic growth, particularly in developing nations, to reduce that pressure on migration.
But that doesn't tackle climate change.
It absolutely does, because what you've got economic growth, and so that you can develop growth and systems within those developing nations in areas where there is greater climate change. You cannot expect mass immigration and migration to continue unparalleled.
Well, you've got £18 billion of cuts.
So, I mean, the Scottish Government already receive much more generous funding than England and Wales because of the Barnett formula. And as I say, and actually police numbers in Scotland have recently gone down. We have now hit record ever numbers across England and Wales. More, in fact, as Nick knows, more than there were in 2010 by about 3,000.
Richard Tice.
And we're
be honest with the figures.
8,000 more.
Since you've been in charge, the population has increased by about 6 million
Crime's
people.
gone down.
No, it
Crime
hasn't.
has gone down.
No, it
Yes, it
hasn't.
has.
Knife crime has almost tripled. Let's remember, you talk about stop and search, but actually stop and search under your government has reduced by 2/3 in the last 14 years. Per 100,000 people, we're almost 10% less officers, police officers across England and Wales. So the reality is that you've presided over a massive reduction, and that we've got to get more police out on the streets, away from the back office, away from their desks, get police officers on the streets.
Rape sentences have gone up from 6.5 years under Labour to about 10 years now, and we have legislated to make sure, to Richard's point, that people who are convicted of rape are not automatically released at the halfway point, as they were previously. Labour, shockingly, voted against that measure during the passage of the police crime and sentencing bill.
How astonishing. Chris stands there when 97 of every 100 reported rapes in this country today, absolutely nothing will happen. And he talks about early release. Chris and his government are presiding over people being released 70 days early, a number of whom posed a threat to the public. I mean, come on, Chris, you should be apologising to this audience, not boasting.
Thank you very much indeed. We're going to have to leave it there. Thank you all very much indeed for addressing those questions. Thank you to our audience for engaging with a very wide-ranging debate. And we managed to have a whole election debate without having an argument about tax. That's all we have time for.